Hello, welcome to Flipped Learning. This video will look at poetic meter and rhythm. So while you're watching this, feel free to go back, stop, take notes, play it again, and so on. Just make sure you have a clear understanding of what meter and rhyme actually is. We'll have a look at it together in class next. So first off, meter is the rhythm of a poem. There are specific ways to analyze meter so that we can say something clear about a poem's rhythmic pattern. This lesson will show you how. We scan a poem to determine its basic rhythm and to consider the relevance of that rhythm to the meaning of the poem. Poetry has much in common with music, and both have mathematical foundations. When we scan a poem, we begin by saying the poetic lines aloud, paying careful attention to the syllables, which seem to be stressed, meaning pronounced with more emphasis, and then non-stressed, the ones that aren't pronounced with emphasis. So first of all, we need to understand how to look at a poem. So we need to look at the structure. So first off, there's a stanza, which is two or more lines of poetry that work like a paragraph in a piece of text. The ordinary language people use in speaking or writing. And then there's a refrain, repetition of a phrase, line, or group of verses at definite intervals in the poem, usually at the end of stanzas. Similarity or likeness of sound existing between two words, such as top and stop, is what we call rhyme. You should be pretty familiar with this. Now there is a couple different types of rhyme in poetry that we look at. There's end rhyme, meaning rhyming words appear at the end of two lines of more poetry. For example, I do not like green eggs and ham, and then the next line rhymes by saying, I do not like them, Sam, I am. Then we have internal rhyme, so that was end rhyme. An internal rhyme occurs when rhyming words appear in the same line of poetry. For example, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. So there we have that A sound being internally rhymed. When we talk about this, we look at the rhyme scheme, so the pattern or sequence in which rhyme sounds occur in a stanza or poem. To label a rhyme scheme, S-C-H-E-M-E, a similar letter is assigned to each pair of rhyming sounds in a stanza. So let's look at labeling a rhyme scheme. Rhyming pattern in a stanza or poem can be identified by looking at the last word in the line and assigning the letter to the different rhymes. For example, as you can see here, like the sun behind the clouds, so we put an A for the ouds sound, and then like the darkness of the night. Now that does not rhyme with clouds, so we do a different letter, so A and then B. Like the grass beneath the trees, we haven't come to that rhyme yet, so that's another letter, C. You stepped into the light. Now this does rhyme with one, it rhymes with the second line. So night and light rhyme, so we put the letter B again to symbolize that rhyme scheme. So meter and rhythm, they describe patterned repetition of stressed and unstressed syllable in a line of poetry. The meter and rhythm of a poem creates the beat. When we talk about verse, we talk about the metric line of poetry names according to the kind and number of feet composing it. We'll have a look at that in more detail shortly. Refrain means repetition of a line or phrase of a poem at regular intervals, especially at the end of a stanza, or poetry paragraph, meaning the division of poetry named for the number of lines it contains. Now we will have a go at this with an unseen poem and try and work it out. So, Aunt Jennifer's tigers prance across the screen. The slide has glitched slightly, but have a go at correcting this yourself. So as I read it aloud, notice where I stress and where there are unstressed syllables. Then we'll count the stressed syllables in this first single line. Here are 5 stressed syllables in each line. So have a look. Aunt Jennifer's tigers prance across a across a screen. Once we have taken account of the stressed syllables in each line, we have a good idea of what the dominant meter of the poem is. Every line may not be the same, but usually there will be one dominant pattern. In this poem, we could scan all the lines and we would see that there are generally 5 stresses, meaning 5 stressed syllables, to each line. Poetry scanned makes use of Greek-derived words to label the meter of a poem. Let's take a look at those. So we measure the meter of a poem using the measurement of poetic feet. So a foot in poetry is one stressed syllable, and the unstressed syllable that seems to go with it. Now this can get confusing. Don't lose heart. It takes time to learn this well, so just keep practicing and practicing. So, poetic meter. This is the term or name we call certain poetic uses of stress. So if one stress equals 1 foot, then we can work out the meter. The poem we read has 5 stresses per line, so 5 poetic feet per line, or a pentameter. So just think stresses equal feet, it's just the terminology we use. So we can be more specific by looking for a pattern in the stresses. So the pattern in this poem that we've looked at has a pattern of non-stressed, then stressed. So it's called an iamb, or iambic pattern. We also call this an iambic pentameter. So have a look through, take some notes on these. Also for your notes, these are the terms for the other patterns. So there's iambic, anapestic, trochaic, dactylic, and spondaic. So to summarize what we have found in this poem, we could say about Richard's poem, Aunt Jennifer's Tigers, the meter is iambic pentameter. This tells readers that the dominant meter of the poem is 5 stresses to a line, meaning pentameter, and that the dominant pattern or foot of syllable stress is iambic. We often use iambic pentameters in everyday conversation, such as, I'd like to meet a friend of mine. Sorry, I made a mistake, bear with me. Such as, I'd like you to meet a friend of mine. See how that uses the same rhythm? Have a read through this next slide and see if you agree. That's it for this video. If something doesn't quite make sense, post a question on our online discussion forum, email me, or have another look through the slides. There's heaps of resources online about this. You can always have a look at other YouTube videos too. See you next lesson, and we'll try and apply this to the poem London we discussed in class last. Thank you.